A wartime icon, an 8,000-pound chariot of steel, a Detroit diesel-powered four-wheel tank. It was a vulgar, tasteless abomination, and everybody loved it. In 1992, there was no better way to express your patriotism than spending $70,000 on a truck that could reliably operate in extremely harsh conditions, like blowing up roadways in Kuwait, fording rivers and uncharted mountains in the roads of Afghanistan, and the occasional dropping the kids off to school. The sound of the Detroit diesel V8 was iconic. It was loud and brash, and punished your wallet every time you went full throttle. The H1 was a product of the economic boom of the 1990s, the extremely lucrative military-industrial complex, and a sprinkle of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Its demise, though, was as predictable as using a Rolls-Royce to win the World Rally Championship. It was the right tool for the wrong job. This is the story of the Hummer H1, the most capable civilian vehicle ever made that no one needed. Welcome to Forgotten Legends. Today's video is brought to you by Fume. We've all heard the phrases, be smart and don't start, kick the habit, yet we still continue to do bad habits. Fume is on a mission to accelerate humanity's breakup from the bad habits that consume far too many of us. Fume is a natural, diffusive device that uses plants and behavioral science to help you trade out your negative habit for a positive one. Instead of ingesting chemicals that you probably can't pronounce, Fume uses cores infused with plants like peppermint and cinnamon for delicious natural flavors. Personally, I love the wood and metallic construction, feels great, and my favorite flavor is the white cranberry. It's sweet, it's citrusy, but not too overbearing, and you can adjust how much diffusion happens with the airflow dial. They have thousands of 5-star reviews from people just like you who've successfully switched when other solutions didn't work. So head over to tryfume.com/337speed and use code 337speed to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. The Journey Pack comes with 3 unique flavors and the new version 2 Fume to help you kickstart your positive habits. That's tryfum.com and use the code 337speed to save an additional 10% off your order today. For the majority of us, we experience war from the comfort of our own home. The images we see on television burn themselves into our psyche. During the Gulf War in the 1990s, the images of oil wells ablaze and destroyed Iraqi tanks flooded the news. Within the flood of pictures and videos broadcasted internationally, an unfamiliar face became more and more a symbol of the U.S. military complex, the HMMWV, or better known as the Humvee. In the late 1970s, the U.S. Army found its need for a better performing vehicle to replace its M151 quarter-ton Jeeps and its Cuck Vs that were basically civilian trucks adapted for military use. This need for a high-mobility combat vehicle would have even Lamborghini attempt to build a replacement known as the Cheetah, which was Lamborghini's first attempt at an off-road vehicle. Chrysler Defense, Teledyne Continental, and AM General would all develop their version of a high-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, and subsequently AM General winning a $1.2 billion contract based on the combination of theirs being the most technically qualified and cheapest to manufacture. Hence, the M998 Humvee was born. The 1985 Humvee made more than double the power of the outgoing M151 Jeeps thanks to its 150 horsepower 6.2-liter Detroit diesel V8, which was non-turbocharged and liquid-cooled. It had an even more impressive full-time four-wheel drive system with a low-range transfer case and a 1.92-to-1 geared wheel hub that essentially doubled the torque output at the tire. Since the torque multiplication happened at the tire, lighter axle shafts, brake components, and differentials were used without sacrificing reliability, and they were tucked away in between the frame rails, giving exceptional ground clearance. This made the Humvee extremely wide since the drivetrain was stuffed into the passenger compartment, but it also benefited from this width by a lower center of gravity and practically being unflippable, which the M151 was notorious for. It could traverse even the most extreme terrain with 16 inches of ground clearance, 54 degrees of approach angle, and 38 degrees of departure angle, and used torques and differentials to distribute the power to all 4 wheels when traction was limited. The Humvee was the definition of high mobility, and since it was able to be outfitted in over 17 different configurations, also fulfilled the multi-purpose role. But this jack of all trades did come at a cost. This cost was $23,000 per base unit, up $6,000 over the M151A2 Jeeps, which it replaced. This was an additional $330 million over 5 years for 55,000 units, and made no difference since the taxpayers were footing the bill. Operation Desert Storm would put the Humvee on the world stage. It quickly became a symbol of American military might, and its reputation was solidified almost overnight thanks to the successful operation. After the war, AM General had thoughts of building a civilian-spec Humvee, but it would take the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who after seeing an army convoy of Humvees on a movie set, successfully convinced AM General to build the civilian-spec version, hence the Hummer was born. The Hummers rolled down the same assembly lines in Mishawaka, Indiana as the Humvees, but were fit and finished in a separate building. The drivetrains, chassis, suspension were virtually identical, but the real difference came down to the trim and electronics. The new Hummer featured a regular 12-volt electrical system, while the Humvee carried the NATO standard 24-volt electrical system. The Hummers also featured more sound and heat insulation, air conditioning, and the federally mandated 3-point seat belts. It was available in 4 different configurations, from a 2-door hardtop, a 4-door hardtop, a 4-door canvas top, and a wagon. In its core form, it was the same military-spec Humvee, just built to the absolute minimums to use on public roads. This meant dismal braking performance, atrocious fuel economy, a 20-second 0 to 62 time, and a top speed of 72 miles per hour, which wasn't an issue in the deserts of Kuwait, but on public roads it was probably a fair race with a Peterbilt 379. Even with its underwhelming performance on roads and huge $50,000 price tag, the Hummer would become a pop culture icon throughout the 1990s, and every celebrity wanted their hands on one. Amongst its military-derived contemporaries like the G-Class and Land Rover Defender, the Hummer was a formidable opponent off-road since it had greater approach and departure angles, more ground clearance, deeper fording depths, and a central tire inflation system which can inflate and deflate all 4 tires from a push of a button. The advantages of the Hummer ended as soon as it met the street. The G320 was more powerful, lighter, faster. The fit and finish and interior quality of the G320 was light years ahead of the Hummer, even with its optional convenience packages. Even its domestic competitors like the Ford Bronco and Jeep Wrangler offered more of a complete package, but it still wasn't a Hummer. By 1999, 7,437 Hummers had been purchased by the public and some municipalities, and General Motors would then acquire exclusive rights to the Hummer brand name from AM General, and the Hummer would now be named the H1. By that time, the H1 had a larger 6.5-liter Detroit diesel V8 that was turbocharged with 6 pounds of boost and produced 195 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. The new marketing push by GM had sales peaking in the year 2000, but it soon would take a drastic turn. The early 2000s saw economic stagnation in the US after 9/11, and the Iraq War had fuel prices continually surging higher and higher. The H1 wasn't spared from the tightening grip of the economic and political space, as it was the poster child of the militarization of American culture. The media needed someone to blame, and the Hummer brand was the perfect scapegoat. The introduction of the H2 in 2003 gave even more excuse for negative public opinion, since it was a more luxurious and flashy addition to the Hummer lineup.
In shock, I still am.
Gareth Groves is trying to figure out why someone nearly totaled the used Hummer he'd been working for months to buy, and had only owned for about a week.
The H2, despite its more subdued cosmetics compared to the H1, rode on a one-off chassis combining the GM 2500 utility frame and beefier construction to handle the weight. It was produced in AM General's plant in Mishawaka, Indiana, and had a more powerful 6-liter Ep.4 GM small block V8, larger interior space, better ride quality, and still a decent off-roader with its locking transfer case and differentials. It could appeal to a broader audience, and first-year sales of the H2 outsold all years of the H1 combined since 1992. The Hummer brand found their new cash cow. The H1 sales were almost non-existent by 2004, and the last hurrah for the H1 was the Alpha. The 2006 H1 Alpha fixed the underpoweredness of the H1 with its Isuzu Duramax engine, made it to a 5-speed Allison 1000 transmission designated as the LLY. It made 105 more horsepower and 90 more pound-feet of torque, shaving 5 seconds off the 0 to 60 and getting better fuel mileage. The engine was so big, the Alpha's body needed to be raised 2 inches off the frame to clear the turbocharger, and the rest of the truck was strengthened to withstand the extra weight and power. This came at an eye-watering $126,000 price tag. That same year, Hummer sales would reach 71,524 sales thanks to the H2 and the newly released released H3 versus only 729 H1s that were sold that year. Nearly 1% of Hummer sales were H1s. With new emissions mandates rolling out for 2007 that required diesel particulate filters and selective catalyst reduction systems, it would cost more to retrofit the H1 than it was making in profit, and therefore it was the end of the H1. It's commendable how long a military truck design in the 80s stood the test of time in the civilian market. The H2 and H3 would later find a similar fate as more potential buyers didn't want to be associated with the brand that was so hated for just existing. The GM bankruptcy in 2009 sealed the deal, and the Hummer brand was discontinued along with Saturn, Saab, and Pontiac. The H1 is a relic of a bygone era, a time where you literally could buy a military vehicle just to commute to work. As capable as it was, it couldn't traverse the changing political and economical landscape of the 2000s, and not even Arnold Schwarzenegger could save it.